Well, this was actually a good dramatic pause because it's a bit of a bold title, as one of the reviewers also pointed out. So now we call it Using Foundation Models for Cognitive Modeling, which also sets the stage a bit better because in contrast to other talks that we've heard so far, the focus here is really on not so much training a new foundation model, but showing the flexibility of existing foundation models for behavior rather than neural data. So this is really rather from the behavioral perspective of things. Okay, I believe one of the panel questions yesterday, am I too loud? Does this work? Okay, I believe one of the panel questions yesterday was to define a foundation model in one sentence. And I also brought a candidate for this, which comes from the Stanford Center of Research on Foundation Models, who coined this term. And they define it as any model that is trained on broad data that can be adapted to a wide range of downstream tasks. And I don't have to tell you this, but these adaptations to downstream tasks are omnipresent. I mean, we've heard about a lot of projects in that realm. And I mean, from the likes of ChatGPT to AlphaFold or BrainLM, these models shape every corner of society and science. So it only makes sense that we use these foundation models to try to understand human behavior a bit better. And as it happens, we have a large-scale project on that in our lab, led by a colleague of mine, Marcel Binz, where we take a bunch of tasks from the cognitive science literature and fine-tune a llama model on choices from these tasks, amounting to, in this data set, over 10 million choices. So then we created this fine-tuned model that we call Centaur, because that's as close as it gets to half man, half llama. And Centaur is actually incredibly good at predicting human behavior. So here you can just see that it outperforms classic cognitive models or base llama across most of these task domains. However, today the focus is not so much on predicting human behavior, but in the project that I'm presenting to you today, we are more concerned with explaining human behavior. And why were we optimistic going into this project that this can work? As you all know, we can provide an LLM in natural language with data and task descriptions, and LLMs are incredibly good at pattern recognition and also code synthesis. So the hope in this project was really that we can basically provide an LLM with data and get a model of the underlying data generating process out of it in Python code. And for this, we constructed 3 experiments. I'll explain them as we go along, but for now, it's just important to realize that the first 2 experiments were based on synthetic data created by us. And then in the last experiment, we looked at human data. So let's look at the first experiment, decision-making. Here we simulated behavior from 2 heuristics, the take the best heuristic and the tallying heuristic. So the take the best heuristic simply says that if you have multiple options, a decision maker takes or decides based on a decisive feature of those in those options. So for example, this is just before the lunch break, I think. So you're probably all thinking about the restaurant that you're going to go to. If you have 2 restaurants and there's a couple of dimensions that you compare these on, you have one decisive feature in the take the best heuristic, which could be the quality of the food, for example. And then you just go to the restaurant that has the best quality of food. So rather simple. And then the tallying heuristic says that you compare along all of those dimensions, basically count the winning dimensions and take the option that has the most winning dimensions. So in the restaurant example, if there's another restaurant that is closer and has a better price, you'll take that, even though the quality of the food might not be the best. And the overall setup of this experiment was always that there were 2 options with 3 features each. And then we simulated behavior from these two heuristics, once in a noiseless case and once with noise. So that just means that in the noiseless case, the two heuristics made non-overlapping predictions. And as we induced noise into the system, there were more and more overlapping. So then overall, across these experiments, the structure was that we asked the LLM to do two tasks, model identification and model generation. Model identification really rather serves as a sanity check. And there we always provided the LLM with two candidate models that could underlie the data that it will see or that it has seen and ask it to choose the most likely model. And in model generation, we ask it to, without being provided with candidate models, directly provide Python code for the underlying data generating process. This changes a bit. This pipeline changes a bit as we go to the different experiments, but roughly that's the idea. So let's firstly look at model identification in the decision-making task. I should also mention that for the results that I'm presenting for now, we always used Llama 3.1, 70 billion instruct. We're also looking at different LLMs, but I'll present that a bit at the end. So in model identification, we just provided the data, task description, and the candidate models. So in this case, the heuristics that I just talked about, and asked the LLM to identify the likeliest model by just literally just giving the model name, providing the model name. And in the noiseless case, this worked with perfect accuracy. Okay, I'm glad you can see this because I wasn't sure about the color coding, but it works. And then in the case where we induced noise into the system, the LLM also kind of adheres to the signal to noise ratio. So its accuracy decreases proportionally to the noise in the data, only reaching chance performance when the models were actually not differentiable anymore in their behavior predictions. So this works, this sanity check worked. Let's look at model generation. Here, we don't provide candidate models anymore, but ask the LLM to provide the underlying data generating process in Python code directly. And here you can see code. Yeah, okay. I don't know what this annotation here is, but anyways, you can see code here, or the code that the LLM provided. And this is pretty cool because this is exactly the code with which we simulated the behavior or the data that it sees. So without being kind of fed candidate models, it completely realizes the structure in the data and provides code that when we simulate behavior from this and evaluate it on held out options is identical to the underlying ground truth code. So this is cool, but it's a kind of, it's not a complex task, right? Because in this decision-making case, choices are independent of each other. So you see a choice, or you see options, you make a choice, then you're provided different options independent of your previous choice, you choose again, right? There's no learning over time. And now we wanted to look at a case with learning over time, which increases the complexity of the model that the LLM has to generate. And for that, we chose a bandit paradigm. The rough idea in bandit tasks is always that there's a decision maker that takes an action. Then the decision maker is provided with feedback from the environment in terms of reward. And the decision maker then has to integrate that feedback and take another action, right? So there's learning over time. And here we simulated behavior from two Rescola-Wagner models, one with 2 learning rates based on the reward prediction error valence, and one Rescola-Wagner model with a stickiness parameter that just says, or that just basically incentivizes to stick with the previously chosen action. And again, we looked at model identification and model generation, although we adapted the pipeline a little bit because in the bandit case, different bandit models can make the same behavioral predictions, and reasoning over longer sequences in context can be taxing. So that's why we didn't ask the LLM to provide the model ID directly, or the model name, but rather output a function that identifies the likeliest underlying candidate. And again, of course, because this is model identification, we provided candidate models. And this worked really well. I'll not go into the details of this plot, but take my word for it. It has high accuracy. And then in model generation, we adapted the pipeline again a bit in the sense that we standardized the functions that the LLM outputted because we wanted to evaluate these functions, right? So we took the functions that the LLM provided and externally evaluated them and then provided feedback back to the LLM. And this worked in like what we called guided sampling approach. So we asked the LLM to do 10 runs and per run provide 3 cognitive models that underlie the data, or like its models of the data generating process, again in the shape of Python code. And then we took these models and fit them to held out data. And then we provided feedback back to the LLM based on BIC. So we told it which of the models it produced thus far was the best fitting model. And we also gave feedback on we provided the so far used parameter configurations. And both of this in order to incentivize coming up with new models and new parameter configurations. And here you can see snippets of the code. And this was actually quite cool to realize as well, because it does use the structure in the data, right? So it has a mechanism of updating the action value. It uses the reward prediction error, and it has 2 learning rates, as in the ground truth model. However, it doesn't update based on reward prediction error valence, but based on reward. I don't know whether you can see my mouse. Yeah. So here the update happens based on reward, not reward prediction error valence, like in the ground truth model. However, here in the 2 learning rates case, this behavior is almost identical to the ground truth behavior. So behavior simulated from the ground truth model. And then in the stickiness case, again, it really finds the structure in the data. However, it doesn't incentivize staying with the previously chosen action, but it rather decreases the action value of the non-chosen action, which is kind of a similar idea, right? But it's not identical in terms of behavior. So here you can see that it doesn't match the ground truth. This is the ground truth is the horizontal bar, but it's better. It's a better fit than the vanilla Rescola-Wagner model and way better than chance. And also when we ran some qualitative analyses, it showed really similar behavior to the ground truth model. So now we've looked at decision-making and learning, where we increased the complexity, but both of these were based on synthetic data. And now we wanted to look at human data. Human data is inherently noisier, and there's no access to any ground truth anymore, right? So previously we always compared the model generated by the LLM to a ground truth model because we had access to it, because we simulated from it. But now that doesn't exist anymore. So we evaluated the models provided by the LLM based on the currently best known model in the literature. So we stayed with the bandit paradigm in this case. But here we had a partial feedback and a full feedback condition. Should probably go a bit further from the mic. I had a partial feedback and a full feedback condition. And the partial feedback just means that decision makers were provided with feedback based on the choices they made. And full feedback just meant that they were provided additionally to that with feedback based on non-chosen actions. And here the best winning, or the winning models in the literature were a simple Rescola-Wagner model with 2 learning rates, again based on reward prediction error valence. and a Rescola-Wagner model with 4 learning rates based on reward prediction error valence and based on whether an action was chosen or not chosen. And we saw that the LLM provided model was, in terms of model fit, almost identical to the winning model from the literature. And here on the right side, you can again see the code, and the same picture emerges. It really realizes the structure in the data. It does this updating process of the action value based on reward prediction error and differentiates between 2 learning rates, but again, updates based on reward, not reward prediction error valence. And without going into too much detail for the full feedback condition, it looks similar. It realizes the structure in the data. Its model is extremely close to the winning model from the literature, but the updating procedure is again based on reward, not reward prediction error valence. But this is kind of beautiful because it hasn't seen these models. It just looks at the data and realizes really the data generating process and can provide this in the form of Python code. And actually, as I alluded to earlier, I'll take questions afterwards, I think, depending on, yeah. Okay. But I'll remember that you had a question. Yeah. So I alluded to earlier that we are not only looking, or that we not only looked at Llama, but also compared different models and different sizes of Llama. And actually, we always find a model that is even better than the currently known best model in the literature, which is kind of really exciting because, as I showed you previously, our model generating pipeline is really not that involved. So it's not computationally heavy. Researchers from computational labs can use it without any big computational hurdles. So yeah, now we've went through all these experiments, and the picture that emerges is that LLMs are really good at, almost perfect at identifying the underlying ground truth model if provided with candidate models. And they even outperform they even outperform cognitive scientists basically in finding the data generating process model. And the hope in this project is really that we can use foundation models not only for predicting human behavior, but also for getting a better understanding of the data generating process. So basically of the cognitive processes behind these decisions. And as I showed you already, we're currently working on increasing the complexity of the models and the tasks, the experiments that we're looking at. We're trying out a bunch of different LLMs. And we're also trying to figure out which parts of our pipeline determine the success. And I showed you earlier that we externally evaluate the models that are provided by the LLM, right? And there we're thinking about ways to use an LLM to automate this process. So basically to minimize the human in the loop. That is also present while evaluating kind of how sensible the models are that the LLM provides. So currently we're kind of checking this manually, but we're thinking about ways to reduce this, the necessity for the human in the loop, basically. All right, with that, I want to thank you for your attention and my collaborators, Milena Rmush, who was the lead in this project, Akshay Jagadish, Tobias Ludwig, and the head of our institute, Eric Schulz. Thank you.